Imperfecto de subjuntivo. So we're going to look at the second most common use of the subjunctive, which is in the past. It is the imperfect subjunctive. So the imperfect subjunctive refers to a previous experience. For example, if I had more money, if I had more time, it's something that previously you didn't have, but if you could go back and you did have it, something would change. Or it refers to unlikely events or possibilities. If I were you, if I were him, something that might not have actually happened, but if it had happened, again, what would change? What would you do instead? How do we form the imperfect subjunctive? We take the they, eos, eas preterite form of the verb. So for hablar, that will be hablaron. For vivir, that will be vivieron. And for comer, that will be comieron. If you want, you can go back to previous videos where I did the preterite tense if you need to be reminded of what the endings are. But for the forming the imperfect subjunctive, we take the eos, eas, they form of the verb in the preterite tense. We then remove the ron, we remove the ron, and then that's how we get the stem. So for hablar, we have hablaron, and to form a stem, we take off the ron, so we're left with habla. Same with comer, we put it in the they preterite form, which is comieron. We take off the ron, so we're left with comier. And with vivir, we put it in the eos, eas preterite form, which is vivieron, and then we take off the ron and we're left with vivier. Once we have the stem for the imperfect subjunctive, we then add these endings on to the stem. So unlike the present tense subjunctive, for all AR, IR and ER verbs, we can choose between two types of endings. There aren't endings that are specific to any of the ending verbs, but we have an option of two. There is no difference, it just depends which one you'd rather use, which one you think suits yourself better, which one you think looks prettier. It honestly doesn't matter, but there are two sets of endings in the imperfect subjunctive. I'll put them both here and then give a couple of examples of how we can use them or say them. So if we take hablar, for example, and to get the stem of hablar, we put it in the eos, eas, they preterite form, which is hablaron. We take off the ron and we're left with habla, which is the stem. And I'm going to make it the u imperfect subjunctive ending. So that could either be hablarás or hablases. IR and ER ending verbs, I'm going to use the verb vivir, and again we put that in the eos, eas, they preterite form, which is vivieron. We take off the ron, and this time I'm going to put it in the he, she, it imperfect subjunctive form, so we can either have viviera or viviese. Another way that we can use the imperfect subjunctive other than the weirdo acronym is the way that I mentioned before when I said that the imperfect subjunctive refers to a previous experience, that if you were going to go back and change it, we have to use the subjunctive because that's not what really happened. There's a bit of uncertainty and doubt. If I was able to go back, if I had more time, if I had more money, and then something would change, which means there's an uncertainty. Or if an unlikely event or possibility were to happen, if I became you and I went back in time, if I were you, I would do this instead. That's when we use a subjunctive. But instead of, when I said that the subjunctive conjugation comes after the trigger phrase, it's the verb that follows the phrase, not the actual verb in the phrase. When we are using it in this context, the first verb in the sentence becomes the subjunctive, because we're saying, if I had more money, if I were you, I would then do this, I would then go here, I would then travel here. So an example that I used before is, if I had more time, si tuviera más tiempo. You can see that I have conjugated tener, to have, into the imperfect subjunctive conjugation, si tuviera más tiempo, and then what follows, the verb that follows, is always going to be in the conditional. If I had more time, I would travel the world. I would see more of my parents. The verb that follows is always going to be in the conditional. So I'm going to say, si tuviera más tiempo, Viajaría por todo el mundo. I would travel the whole world. And if you go back a couple of videos, I have done a video on the conditional. It is part of my video on the future tenses. So if you need remindering, if you need to remember the endings for the conditional and how you form it, please go have a look at that video, because it's super important that you know how to form the conditional when you are using the subjunctive or the imperfect subjunctive in phrases like this. And the second example I will give is if I were you. If I were you, it's not certain, it's not going to happen, I'm never going to become you, but if I were you, I wouldn't do it. So I would not do it, again, is a conditional phrase, I would not do it. So I'm going to say, si yo fuera tú, if I was you, si yo fuera tú, I have conjugated the verb ser, to be, into the imperfect subjunctive conjugation, fuera. Si yo fuera tú, no lo haría. Not lo haría, I would not do it. I've conjugated hacer, to do, into the conditional haría, and that is how we use the imperfect subjunctive in a different way. So that is the end of the subjunctive and my little video on the subjunctive. I completely understand that it's a really hard concept to get your head around. It's taken me years and years and years to finally understand how and when to use the subjunctive, and I still make mistakes. So it is totally understandable that it's going to take you guys a lot of time to fully understand this. That's why it's super, super, super important that you practice it regularly and you go back to it and you try and incorporate into your speaking and your writing. So that's why your homework, tus os deberes y tu turno, your turn to try this out. I would like you to make 7 sentences, right? 7 sentences with the different uses, the different types of subjunctive that we've talked about in this video. El subjuntivo presente y el imperfecto del subjuntivo. You can write them in the comments and I will have a look and correct them if they are wrong, or I'll let you know if they're wrong and you can go back and change them. And then an extra extension homework is there are some irregulars when it comes to making the stem of the subjunctive. Remember, in the present, you take the you form, you take the yo form, the I form of the present tense. You take off the O, you add the endings. And then for the imperfect subjunctive, you take the ellos, ellas, they preterite form, and you take off the ron. So there are some verbs that do not follow this pattern. So I would like you to find them, write them down, learn them, remember them, and then use them in your writing and your speaking. Entonces, muchas gracias por ver mi video en el subjuntivo. Entiendo que el subjuntivo es un concepto muy difícil. I understand that the subjunctive is a very difficult concept, so don't worry if you have to come back to this video a number of times or make a lot of notes, because it is super difficult to understand. Espero que hayas disfrutado. You can see I've used a subjunctive there. I hope that you have enjoyed. Sí, espero que hayas disfrutado este video y hayas aprendido algo, y hasta luego y adiós.